Well, hello and a very warm welcome to another in our series of Choice Words videos where we get to speak to the great and the good of UK fund research, UK fund selection, find out what makes them tick. I'm Gillian, I'm editorial director of Wealthwise, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Gillian Hepburn, who is head of UK Advisor Solutions at Vanguard. Hello, Gillian.
Hello, Gillian.
Let's get straight into it. What excites you about the current investment outlook? What gives you pause for thought?
Well, let's start with a pause for thought. And I think the geopolitical landscape is challenging, isn't it? And already this year we've seen significant activity globally, which can give uncertainty and unpredictability. However, it's important to note that many of our clients have now experienced a number of bouts of volatility over recent years. And advisors have actually trained them well to sit tight and essentially weather the storm. At Vanguard, actually, we've got some great data that demonstrates market recovery after events such as 9/11, COVID, the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and therefore the virtues of staying long-term disciplined and diversified. In terms of current outlook,
That's good. We got there in the end. Yeah, I was really a bit depressed for a while. Okay.
So in terms of the current investment outlook, I'm actually really excited by the industry drive to encourage more people to invest. And we'll be part of that campaign, which is kicking off later in the year.
We might come back to that. I think that sounds like the sort of thing we'd be talking about further on in these sort of conversations. But I'm going to stick to my script for the time being. In the great portfolio diversification of life and the way you're seeing it now, to what degree do you think professional investors should be thinking beyond traditional assets, cash, bonds, equities, into anything more alternative? How would you define that?
Interesting one. I think we often think of mutual funds as what you've described as traditional investments, but we're now seeing a significant rise, for example, in ETFs, particularly popular amongst younger generations who recognise their benefits. But I don't think we should discount showing an interest in things like crypto and Bitcoin, but not necessarily, I see you raising your eyebrows there, as an investment, but the technology which underpins their delivery is massively interesting. So for example, blockchain should have a part to play in product development of the future, such as personalisation of products, particularly perhaps in decumulation journeys.
Oh, no, that's interesting. I was going to say, I wasn't going to sort of point and shout heretic when you mentioned crypto, but it is the blockchain aspect that is the more
interesting. Technology is really interesting and something we should really take notice of.
Okay. Well, we've touched on a few things already that sort of get into the world of client comms, which I know is a sort of a massive, but you've written lots of stuff for me in the past. What drives the Vanguard approach to client communications? No, you haven't been there terribly long, but I suspect you've got a fair idea already. Do you think there is such a thing? I talk about the right type of client, someone who's going to stay with you along the whole journey and not go. You want to, so they benefit from being in at the beginning and finish when you say time. That's enough. We reached our goal. How do you?
Sure. I mean, I think quite simply, consumer duty must be at the heart of this, particularly in an intermediated world. So, for example, how do we give advisors sound bites in terms of their investment to use with their clients? And then deep dive information, should they need it, to support consumer understanding. It's just so important. But it's also important to deliver communication in different ways, with digital playing an increasing role. But we also believe that it's important to continue to give face-to-face support for clients who really need it.
Okay, great stuff. Let's do a bit more personal now. What was your path into investment? And if you hadn't taken it, what do you think you'd be doing now?
Oh, great question.
Oh, yeah.
I think, like many people in the industry, possibly, it was by accident. I was simply partway through an English degree, decided I didn't want to teach, which had been the plan. Ended up with a summer job at Standard Life, because obviously I was Edinburgh based, and that led me to their graduate training scheme. The rest is really history. Although I started in a customer service division, ended up in marketing, distribution, platforms, before moving into the MPS, so the model portfolio service world. And your second question, if I hadn't gone down that route, I'd probably be attempting to teach Shakespeare to school kids.
Well, I was one of the parallels between teaching Shakespeare to school kids and teaching investment to people who don't seem to value it anymore, the general public, but we'll get there. What was the biggest investment mistake? I'm not saying you necessarily mean. I know that investment is probably more personal with you rather than part of the job. But what was the biggest investment that you ever made, and did you learn anything from it?
Yeah, and I'm really happy to share this one. So many years ago, I allowed an advisor that I was working with to invest my entire bonus, which meant a lot to me. I was very young at the time, but it was invested in a single fund because he just met the salesperson, liked the sound of the fund, which was quite a fashionable one at the time. I absolutely felt the pain of what was a 70% fall. That was a massive, sharp lesson how you really feel about taking risk. And another lesson in why diversification is so important. And it's back to a phrase that we use at Vanguard a lot. It's about buying the haystack, not the needle. Essentially, I invested in the needle and it wasn't a great outcome.
I've not heard that one before. Very good. Actually, well, let's combine client comms and that last question. How would you explain risk to someone who doesn't actually work in the industry?
Great question.
And possibly to that advisor looking back, I would
Yeah,
say.
so I'd probably, the single fund story isn't such a great example of it because, you could argue it could have been amazing, but actually is generally terrible.
Yeah.
Right? And it's all about what can you afford to lose in terms of taking risk. I like to use my beach shop in Scotland analogy, Julian. If it just sold ice cream, right, it might be hard to stay in business. But if you add in some umbrellas, then suddenly it is a much better business model. So diversification is vital.
Very good. Okay. Since I'm defining stuff as well, what's your take on value for money in the context of investment?
I think we all have different views, don't we, on what represents value. And it's often quite personal. But with an investment, it really depends on what is the objective of the investment, but also is it low cost, risk aligned, has clear outcomes, and actually aligned to the target market. So who's it for and in which circumstances? Is that grow, protect, or decumulate?
Very sharp. Everyone's favorite question for choice words. Outside of work, what's the strangest thing you've ever seen or done?
This is really hard, actually.
Yeah, good.
Gosh, you're challenging me.
Yeah.
I think it was probably the moonwalk. So that's the walk during the night to support breast cancer charity.
Right.
I think it was hard because what I hadn't really got my head around was, first of all, if it's done during the night, you should really rest during the day. So I've been running around all day. And also I forgot that doing it in Scotland, despite the fact it was probably the summer, it's still pretty cold. So I finished completely exhausted, but I finished it because it was so important to make sure that I did that because of the people that sponsored me and because of the charity and the cause.
Of course, I know. When you said moonwalk, I mean, obviously,
Oh, yes.
I assumed it wasn't going to be
We saw
something.
the moon.
No, it was saw the moon. But you weren't Michael Jackson. It wasn't. You weren't
No, it
Michael
wasn't
Jackson
moonwalking.
backwards.
No.
Because you said it was have a 16 kilometre. It was, yeah. Okay.
No, just tramping a marathon distance around Edinburgh in the middle of the night on a Friday night, which is, it feels now quite a strange thing to do, but quite rewarding.
I've staggered around Edinburgh late at night, usually with the PRs of Standard Life, with Aegon, with all the rest of the games. Yeah, okay. Different moonwalk.
Different moonwalk.
Back to the industry, what do you see as the best and worst case scenarios for the future of wealth in this country?
For me, I think this is just really simple. The best case is that we manage to close the advice gap. The worst case is we make no progress whatsoever.
That's succinct. Right, I'm going to draw out more questions then. I got a couple of subsidiary ones there.
That's okay.
We're talking about the future. So how do you think wealth and asset managers can best attract the next generation of talent?
That's a good question. I think it's about making our industry more appealing, and also continuing to bust some of the myths which I do still think exist. I do get frustrated at this whole discussion about, particularly from women, we work in a male-dominated industry. I think if we mean that in certain sectors of the industry there are more men than women, then yeah, absolutely fine, I would agree with that. But I I'm just not keen on that word dominated. But I think how we market and how we recruit is really important. And for me, particularly looking forward, we've just got to watch that the algorithms don't take over and screen people out. You know, just for example, right, I probably wouldn't get in today, went to the local comp school, I've got an English degree, why on earth am I here talking to you about investment? So I think we've just got to be careful in terms of how we recruit. And it's back to that whole piece around diversity. It's about diversity of thought and background as much as all the other areas we talk about in terms of, you know, gender and ethnicity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I just have a terrible feeling we're just going into a world where sort of the applicants using AI to craft their applications, and the people in HR are using AI to weed it all out, and you're not quite sure where we end up after that. Yeah, I'm not going to move on to AI, but you can bring it into this question. But it's again looking to the future, or actually probably looking to the present as much. But how can financial services firms, indeed the whole of Hermanage's financial services industry, set about? The question says building trust, but maybe there's open brackets, close brackets before the building. I mean, maybe rebuilding trust.
And I think this whole question of trust, doesn't it, varies across the sector in terms of the different parts of, I guess, the value chain in terms of financial services. But, you know, for us at Vanguard, we've just been highlighted as the company which most advisors trust by quite some margin, and we're really proud of that. And it's important then to think about or to understand what that was based on. So it was based on transparent and clear communication, so something we talked about earlier, delivering a consistent track record and performance, and also interestingly about heritage, brand and scale. So I guess something that we're very proud of in terms of what we were able to deliver for clients in terms of cost because of the growth and the scale of the business. But it was also based on service quality and relationships. I think we are a relationship business, aren't we, in a number of different ways, you know, right from the advisor-client relationship and also to the way that we interface with our clients. So for me, rebuilding trust, if we believe that parts of the sector are struggling here, it's all about thinking about these different points.
Okay, great stuff. Actually, we're zooming through here, but just two more questions. First one, what advice, knowing what you know now, but what advice would you have given yourself on your first day in the business, or like to have given yourself?
A really interesting question, because it's quite some time ago now, so thinking about that. Do you know what? First one is just enjoy it, right? Enjoy it because the time will pass very quickly. Something I've always talked about is just never, ever, ever forget who the customer is and why we do what we do. And then finally, say yes to the pension scheme.
Yes, check that box.
Tick. Yeah.
Good stuff. Last question, we call this choice words because the choices all our viewer, bless you, do for a living. But let's move on to personal choices. Sure. Usually ask one for a book, doesn't have to be in investing, but it can be. And also free choice can be on anything. I won't even go through the various variety of things we've had over the last 30 interviews or so, but open to you.
Okay, if I start with a book, I don't read an awful lot of business books. But actually one that really had an impact on me was The Jelly Effect by somebody called Andy Bounds. And he talked about communication, so something that we've talked about today. It just taught me a lot about thinking about how we communicate. And actually when you read it, you kind of think, maybe some of this is very obvious, but we forget. So that was a really important book. And if I can stick with books, given my background in terms of English, you know, another great book has got to be Hamnet, and that's not just because I saw the film recently. It's fabulous.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, top books. I mean, that's fine. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to. I think we talked about this before. I'm not going to go to the movie. I don't like to cry in public. So there, yeah. So great.
Me, it's not that bad.
That's a great film review. Trust me, it's not that bad.
Well, I heard before I went, take your tissues. You'll need them from about a third of the way through. And I usually cry at lots, but I didn't this time round. So you'll be fine. That
sounds good. Meanwhile, that's our strapline for choice words. Trust us, it's not that bad, honestly. So there we go. Great choice words, choices, Gillian. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for the entire conversation today. Thank you very much for watching. Please look out for further choice words videos as they are published. Thanks again.
Thank you.